Hello, and welcome to Real Cheating Story. I don't know why it never seems to occur to adults that their kids have eyes and ears and are generally pretty savvy when it comes to worldly concerns. The fact is, kids are information sponges. They hear everything, see everything, and react to everything, and much of the time the adults, in their ignorance, don't realize it. This great truth is a mixed blessing, if it's one at all. In my case, it proved enlightening. It was Ben Franklin who once wrote that two people can keep a secret so long as one of them is dead. Well, the same maxim can be applied to kids, and especially to teenagers. They not only know everything that goes on around them, they cannot, for long, keep it to themselves. My daughter, Annie, is a teenager, a junior at Henderson High. My name is Harm Carter. The Harm is for Harmon. I used to work in a steel mill before that goddamn outsourcing sent our jobs and our entire factory to Mexico. Still, I can't complain. I am one of the few that actually prospered from the layoffs. I finished college and eventually got a teaching job at Henderson High School, where I have taught language arts for the past 20 years. I was single, never married actually, when I lost my job at 27 years old, so I was able to survive a bit better than most of my compadres who had families. It was at Henderson that I met my future wife, Ellie Potts. She worked a few hours a week there as a volunteer school nurse, borrowed from the Mayfield Clinic a few miles up the road. Ellie always seemed like the unreachable star to me. All of the male teachers, especially Brad Johnson, were interested in Ellie, so I wasn't going to waste my time chasing after something that seemed out of reach. All of the above said, Ellie wasn't the stereotypical gorgeous model of the year type. She was pleasant-looking, 54 and maybe 115 pounds, with light brown hair, green eyes, and a sunny disposition that made people always want to be around her. Like I say, she never had any problem getting dates, and that was the reason I hesitated for so long in asking her out. I figured that I simply wasn't in her league. Me? I wasn't exactly ugly, but my face was kind of messed up, thanks to a 7.65 caliber bullet that passed through my jaw, knocking out half my teeth and leaving me pretty scarred. The army patched me up, did a little plastic surgery on me, but there were limits. I was lucky, though. A couple of inches higher, and that slug would have taken me out for good. Apart from my scarred-up face, I was about 57, medium build, and thinning brown hair. In short, I was not going to be doing any modeling, but I was in excellent shape. I worked out every day, and the army, in point of fact, had been a breeze for me. I was tough as nails. My first date with Ellie was the result of what I considered a lucky set of circumstances. She had been working late at the school, catching up on paperwork, and I was late leaving after coaching a debate team. My car was parked maybe 50 yards from hers. As I was getting in, I noticed her frowning at her Honda. I went over. "Ellie, hi," I said. "Harmon," she replied. "My car won't start. Do you want me to take a look?" I asked, trying my best to sound helpful. "Would you?" "I'd really appreciate it," she said. Her battery was dead. I got my jumper cables and started her engine. "You owe me a dinner out," I said, laughing. It was a bold move, and I was expecting a polite decline. "Friday night." "Okay," she said. Okay," I stammered, caught off guard. "7-ish?" she added. "Am staying at the Haywood Arms, number 603. Am in the middle of changing my address." I managed to recover from my initial shock and agreed, trying to act confident. Our first of many dates turned out to be fun. We went out for dinner, danced a bit, and ended the evening sitting at a sidewalk cafe, talking into the early morning hours. About 6 months later, we were married in front of a justice of the peace in Amarillo, Texas. It wasn't fancy, but it was simple and legal. That night marked the first time we truly connected on a deeper level. Ellie was shy, yet comfortable. She sat next to me, and I gently turned her toward me. She smiled, and I kissed her lightly on the lips, then kissed her again. After a few minutes, we embraced, and I could feel her relax, gradually losing some of the nervousness she had felt. I smiled at her reassuringly, taking my time as the special moment approached. I could tell she was still anxious. I gently placed my hand on her cheek. "It's time for us to take the next step together," I said softly. A single tear welled up in the corner of her eye. "Go ahead," she whispered. We rested for hours afterward. I woke up at first light and turned to see Ellie still sound asleep, snoring lightly. Good, I thought. an untroubled sleep, a good way to start a marriage. After our week-long honeymoon, she felt a bit sore for a few days, but we both embraced the start of our life together with joy. Today was Ellie's birthday. Annie and I had set everything up. The cake was on the table, ice cream too. 2 presents, one from Annie and one from me, were wrapped and waiting for Ellie to arrive. We hoped she would be surprised. We were excited. She was supposed to be home in less than 5 minutes. She was rarely late, unless she let us know in advance, but this time, she hadn't. It turned out this was one of the rare occasions when she was delayed. About half an hour after she was due to arrive, Ellie called. She explained that she had been held over at the hospital because they were short-staffed, and she had volunteered to stay longer. I must have sounded a little disappointed on the phone. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said. "I'll be home as soon as I can." I said all the right things, and after she said goodbye, I hung up. Ellie made it home about 3 hours later. Just after 9 p.m., Annie and I were still up, and we put on a good face, giving her our presents. Ellie was genuinely upset with herself for being late, but she showered us with appreciation, praising our thoughtfulness and love. Still, something felt off, though I couldn't quite place what it was. Had I been more attuned to human emotions, I might have picked up on the subtle signs of guilt, though not the kind of guilt for being late on her birthday. It was only later that I learned Annie had noticed what I had missed. Ellie loved the emerald earrings I had bought her, which suited her perfectly as her birthday is in May. She also appreciated the new bikini that Annie had given her. For the next few days, things seemed wonderful. Our family life felt harmonious, and we enjoyed quality time together. Annie had asked for permission to go to the mall with her best friend, Carol. I agreed but insisted they be home before dark. It was Saturday, traffic was light, and Carol was a cautious driver, so I had no concerns. I spent the afternoon mowing the lawn and then settled down to watch a ball game. Around 3 p.m., the front door suddenly burst open, and Annie stormed inside, crying. She rushed upstairs to her room. I followed her, but when I tried to open the door, she pushed back, trying to keep me out. "Annie, what's going on?" I called out, bewildered. After a brief struggle, she finally said, "Dad, leave me alone. Just leave me alone." Confused, I responded, "But Annie," before she cut me off, continuing to push me away. Eventually, I said, "Okay, maybe you'll feel more comfortable talking to Mom later." "No," she screamed, slamming the door shut and locking it behind her. Very strange, I thought, assuming it had to be something related to a boy. But I was wrong. 6 hours later, Ellie's car pulled into the driveway. Annie had stayed in her room all day, only leaving for brief trips to the bathroom. I gave her space, planning to talk to her the next day. When Ellie came in and took off her coat, I told her about Annie's strange behavior. Ellie looked perplexed. Annie had asked to go to the mall after Ellie had already left for work, so Ellie hadn't known that she had actually gone. As soon as I mentioned Annie's trip to the mall, her early return, and how upset she had been, Ellie's face went pale. Oh God, 2 upset women in the house at the same time, I thought. "They'll talk to her in the morning." "Sounds like girl trouble to me," said Ellie. "You go golfing or something, okay?" "Yeah, okay, I guess," I said, choosing to back off from the situation for now. The following morning, I kissed my clearly anxious wife goodbye and headed for the driving range. I knew Cal and probably Sammy would be there, so I wouldn't be on my own. Ellie watched as I drove off, bracing herself for what she feared would be a difficult confrontation with our daughter. She wasn't sure what to expect. Ellie knocked softly on Annie's door. "Go away," came the reply from inside. "Annie, it's me, Mom. Get the hell away from me," Annie screamed. Ellie felt her heart sink, her worst fears almost confirmed. She gathered her resolve and made a decision. She had already grabbed the spare keys from atop the fridge. Slowly, as quietly as possible, she unlocked Annie's door and pushed it open. Inside, Annie was huddled on the floor near the window, the bed still made. She looked terrible, like she had been crying all night. "Annie, what's going on? Why are you talking like this?" Ellie asked, still hoping it wasn't what she feared. "Are you kidding me?" Annie spat. "You saw us, didn't you?" Ellie hesitated. "Saw us? Oh yeah, Mom. I saw you. Carol saw you. Danielle saw you. Hugging and kissing up on that guy." Did you know, Mom, that your fling is named after a gangster? A killer? Huh. Yeah. You know Bonnie and Clyde, right? Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow? No, I didn't know that, Ellie stammered. But he's not my. It's not like that. Don't even try, Mom. We'll talk as soon as Dad throws you out. Annie shot back, her voice trembling with rage. Ellie lost her composure and slapped her daughter. You will not talk to me that way, she snapped. Annie staggered back, stunned, before raising her hands to stop Ellie from saying anything more. Mom, don't ever raise your hand to me again. I'm strong, and I will react if you do, Annie warned. Ellie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. What are you going to do, Annie? What do you want me to do? Annie's eyes narrowed. Her breathing became shallow as she processed everything that had been running through her mind all night. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. First, you're going to tell me everything. Then you're going to confess to Dad as soon as he gets home. Ellie shivered. He'll divorce me. I know I deserve it. But do you really think that's the best way? Annie's tone was sharp. Are you asking me if honesty is the best way? Really? Ellie couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. I don't know, Annie. It was a mistake, and maybe I should start telling you everything. Fine. Clyde and I met at that hospital picnic last year. You were there too with your dad. I know him, Annie cut in. He's a car salesman in town. I know his daughter Carla. We have classes together. Ellie looked surprised. I didn't know that. And I didn't know you were involved with her dad, Annie said bitterly. So I guess we're even. You were involved with him, right? Ellie began to cry. He asked me to lunch a few months ago. Your father and I were going through a rough patch. I guess I wanted to get even. I let him take me to a motel. I know it's a cliché, but it happened. We were together, and yes, we were intimate. Say it, Annie pressed. Ellie, choking back sobs, nodded. Yes. How many times? Annie demanded. Once a week, Ellie confessed. He made me feel special, like a woman who mattered. I guess I thought I needed to hear those things. And Dad? Do you love him? Ellie hesitated. I don't love Clyde. It was a mistake. I love your father. He's the only one I've ever truly loved. Wonderful, Annie said sarcastically. What are you going to do when Dad finds out? Did you think that far ahead? Ellie broke down. I was weak, Annie. I gave in, and I'm so sorry. I've thought about it, but I got caught up in something I couldn't control. Clyde even hinted that if I stopped, he might tell your father. I'm not making excuses, but it felt like blackmail. I know I was wrong. I know I'll be punished. Ellie fell to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Annie stood over her, looking almost warrior-like in her fury. It's not about what I'm going to do, Mom. It's about what Dad's going to do. You've not only hurt yourself, you've hurt our whole family. Annie paced the room for a moment, her anger gradually subsiding. When she finally stopped, her voice softened slightly. Mom, you have to confess to Dad. No delays, no lies, no half-truths. You have to tell him everything. If you want, he'll be there with you. You do still want to stay with Dad, right? I mean, from now on? Annie asked, pausing. If he doesn't ask you to leave. Yes, Annie, Ellie said. But if I confess, there's little chance of us staying together. He'll likely ask me to leave, and I wouldn't blame him. But that means we'll be done as a family. I'm just so scared. I'll bet, Annie said. Her earlier anger softened. She joined her mom on the floor and comforted her, though she remained firm. The truth, Mom. All of it. Okay, Ellie replied weakly, still sobbing. One more thing, and it has to be the truth. Understand? Yes, sure, Ellie said between sobs. Have there been others? Don't lie to me, Annie demanded. Ellie began to cry even harder. I guess that answers my question, Annie said, her face pale. How many? 2, Ellie whispered. Oh God, Dad's going to be devastated, Annie said, unable to hide her disappointment. Ellie looked at her daughter and, through her sorrow, realized how strong she had become. A young woman who would one day command respect if she didn't already. Ellie simply nodded, accepting her daughter's judgment. I came home from the driving range about 3 hours later, having enjoyed the exercise and hoping I wasn't about to face something unpleasant. I had hoped in vain. Ellie was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of water in front of her. "Harm, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice even, though she didn't meet my eyes, which worried me. I've already spoken with Annie at length, and now the truth has to come out. "I am so sorry, Harm." Annie stood at the other end of the kitchen, arms folded. Suddenly, Ellie broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I rushed to her side. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked, pulling her into a hug. "Harm, I cheated on you," she finally said. At first, I couldn't process what I was hearing. Then, my body betrayed me. I felt dizzy and nearly fainted, only able to steady myself by grabbing the kitchen counter. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. Annie quickly came over, guiding me to a chair. "It's all right, Daddy. Just listen. We'll deal with everything afterward, okay?" I think I nodded, though I was still in shock. "Harm, I'm so sorry," Ellie sobbed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't forgive myself either." Everything felt surreal, like I was in a dream I couldn't wake from. My breathing became shallow, and I felt lightheaded again. That was the last thing I remembered until I woke up later, staring into a bright light. Ellie and Annie were standing on either side of my hospital bed. "Honey, you had a heart attack," Ellie said softly. "It's all my fault. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I will never forgive myself." I drifted in and out of consciousness over the next day. When I woke again, Ellie was asleep in a chair across from me. Annie had left, probably gone home or to her grandmother's house. As I watched Ellie sleep, the memories began to come back to me. Ellie had cheated on me. Why? My heart was no longer in immediate danger, but my stomach churned. I vomited, and in my weakened state, began to choke. Ellie woke up, and a nurse rushed in. Medical personnel soon surrounded me, helping me stabilize. 2 days later, after tests and discussions with my doctor, it became clear that both the heart attack and stomach issues had been triggered by stress. No surprise there. The following day, a psychologist came to see me. The prognosis was simple. I'd be okay, but I needed to take things slowly, work through things with my wife, and try to regain some mental balance. Easier said than done. Back at home, things were quiet, too quiet. I didn't need tents. Ellie and Annie took turns caring for me, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Ellie had guilt written all over her, and I felt sorry for her. Annie shot angry glances at her mother periodically, but did her best not to stir up tension. The therapist had advised me to work things out with Ellie. What exactly did that mean? I decided to make an effort to talk to Ellie about everything. I couldn't just sit idly by. I had to do something. But just when I was preparing myself to have that conversation, Annie stepped in with her own thoughts. "Dad, can we talk? Just you and me?" she asked. "Annie, this is between—" "No, Dad. It concerns the three of us, and I have a lot to say." "I need to say it." I was taken aback by her firmness. "Okay, I guess you're right. It does concern all of us," I said. She set her glass of water down on the TV tray next to me. "Dad, Mom made some serious mistakes. She didn't even like those people, especially not Barrow. I've been talking to her, and I think she's impulsive. She just does things without thinking, and by the time she realizes she's gone too far, it's too late to easily back out. Mom just can't handle complicated situations." "Honey, your mom is an adult. Adults have responsibilities, and the biggest one is to love and respect their family." "Dad, she does love us. I know you know that. As for the respect part, yeah, she messed up. She disrespected you and, by extension, me too. That's going to be hard to move past. But as your daughter, I really hope you'll listen to me and give her another chance, for both of our sakes." "Honey, I want to, but I just don't know right now," I said. "Will you promise me that you'll at least think about it?" "Yeah, I guess. You know, you'd make a great salesperson," I said. She smiled and retreated into the front room. For the time being, the den had become my favorite place to relax. I could see out to the patio, and there was a TV and a computer there. Even though I was mostly confined to the wheelchair as a precaution, I had a pretty good setup. I could get up and walk to the bathroom or grab a drink if they weren't in the room, but mostly I just sat and thought. I knew that wasn't a good thing for me. I got up and slowly walked into the front room. I felt a little better but knew a change was needed. When I caught up with Ellie, she was folding clothes in the living room. I startled her when I called her name. She hadn't seen me come in. She nodded. I know, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. It's time to talk. I'm feeling better today, and I need to hear it. I can't keep wondering what happened between us. I was glad that Annie wasn't home at the moment. We've been married for 20 years, Ellie. 20 very good years. You've been a wonderful wife, a mother, and, well, we've had a good life together. She sighed. I know. I've been ungrateful and selfish. I waited, expecting to feel overwhelmed or sick, but nothing happened. I was finally moving past the initial shock of everything. I nodded for her to continue. As much of a cliché as it sounds, it was never about love. It was just the thrill of something different. I swear it wasn't more than that. Is that supposed to make me feel better, Ellie? I asked. No. I just want you to understand that I know how much I hurt you. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. There were only a few people, Harm, 3 men over the course of our marriage. They were all brief, meaningless, and I swear to you, it's all in the past. There's no chance of it happening again. Who? I asked. Jimmy Shanklin, Mario Cummings, and Clyde Barrow, she said. I knew all of them, though not well. I also knew the first 2 had been divorced by their wives, and I couldn't help but wonder if Ellie's involvement with them had contributed to those divorces. I thought it was unlikely because I probably would have heard something if that were the case. But, as the saying goes, once a cheater, always a cheater. Those guys likely had more than one affair, and it eventually caught up with them. Clyde Barrow was about to face the consequences as well. Why did you finally decide to tell me all of this? I asked. I didn't. Not exactly. Annie happened to go to the mall with her friends last week, and they saw me and Clyde together. Annie made me tell you. I'm glad she did. The guilt was eating me up inside. That girl of ours is incredible, Ellie said. She really is, I replied. What are you going to do with me, Harm? Do I have a chance? She asked. I realized I didn't have an answer to that question. I hadn't even thought about what to do. I just wanted to understand what had happened. Now that I knew, at least in part, I had to consider the next steps. I haven't gotten that far, Ellie. What do you think I should do? I asked. That seemed to surprise her. Me? Harm? I don't know. If it had been you in my position. But it wasn't, was it? You made that choice. You have a point, Ellie said. Would you have kicked me out, or given me a chance to make it right? To change my ways? Honestly, I don't know the answer to that, but I'd hope I would have given you another chance. I know that sounds self-serving. It did sound self-serving, but I believed it. Ellie had always been forgiving in the past, even when people had wronged her. Of course, nothing that had ever happened to her came close to what she had done to me. That said, she had once helped one of our best friends hold their marriage together when it had started to crumble for similar reasons. Just then, Annie came into the room, slightly out of breath. She could tell we had been talking and frowned. Should I stay? She asked. I was about to tell her to go to her room, but I changed my mind. Annie seemed to have a better grasp of things than either of her parents. Yes, stay, if you're willing. This involves you too. Your mom and I have been talking about a lot of issues, and I'd appreciate your input, I said. Annie nodded. I turned to Ellie. Ellie, why did you start doing these things? Why hurt me like this? I asked, choosing my words carefully. Harm, I didn't do it to hurt you. You have to believe me, Ellie said. But you knew it would hurt me, didn't you? I asked. I thought that you wouldn't find out, Ellie said. Really? You knew I knew all of the men you've mentioned. You never thought that one of them would slip up and reveal what was going on? I asked. No, it didn't occur to me, Ellie admitted. I see. I find it hard to believe that you never considered it, I said. I knew it was possible, Harm, but I was very careful. I didn't want you to be hurt. I really didn't, Ellie pleaded. Careful, Ellie. You were messing with that guy in the middle of the mall. What exactly is your definition of careful? I was not trying to be kind, Mom. You really are clueless. How did you ever get through nursing school? I looked at my daughter, thinking it best to let her express herself. I was the one who asked her to stay. Ellie just shook her head in despair. Good point, Ellie. You're not stupid. I think you didn't worry about it because you were too full of yourself and thought you were too smart to get caught, I said, cutting her off. I think you thought I was just too dumb to catch on. Wasn't that more like it? Harm. No. I never thought you were stupid. I really didn't. I wasn't thinking at all. I made horrible mistakes, but… Harm? She seemed to lose her train of thought. Yes, I never stopped loving you. And I never loved any of them. You say you did it for variety and the thrill of it. What about me? I know I don't qualify as variety, but haven't I ever thrilled you? Oh my God, yes, honey. It's just that you were always so busy, even on weekends. I need affection a lot, I guess. Maybe that's the main reason I strayed. She looked down, and tears started to fall again. That caught me off guard. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to think back and visualize how often I'd run off without considering her needs. I had to admit she was right. I hadn't been the most attentive husband. That didn't excuse her actions, but I could at least accept that I might have done better. Tomorrow, I'm going to start working out again, Ellie. I need to get my strength back. The doctor said it was okay as long as I took it slow. I want you to join the gym with me. She looked at me as if I were crazy. Me? Harm. I am no muscle builder or anything. I wouldn't know what to do at a gym. But her expression brightened considerably. You mean? I know what to do, and I will show you. I've been thinking a lot this past week. I realize I haven't been treating you well when it comes to our intimacy. I glanced over at Annie. Annie, you can go upstairs if you want, honey, I said. Like that's going to happen, said Annie, ready to stick around. She has a right to be here. She needs to know what's going to happen next and how you're going to handle this. But what you said about going to the gym, does that mean you're keeping me around? Ellie asked hopefully. I nodded. From now on, I'm going to make sure I'm doing my part in this marriage. We'll do everything together. You'll come to the gym with me, and I'll drive you to the mall whenever you want. Does that mean you're forgiving me? Ellie asked. I forgave you when I saw you sitting in the hospital, watching over me these past days, I replied. She sensed something in my demeanor that made her uncertain of my meaning, but she continued, I forgive you, but it's going to take a long time before I trust you again. That will be your challenge. You'll know that I'm likely to be suspicious of nearly everything you do, I said. And yes, it goes without saying that you'll hold my cheating against me if I do it again, she replied. I understand. I wouldn't blame you at all, and thank you, Harm. Thank you for giving me another chance. Initially, after our reconciliation and deciding to try again, I thought it best to let the matter drop. I believed that was best for all of us, me, Annie, and Ellie. But then I heard something unsettling. Clyde Barrow, a regular at the bar I sometimes visited, had been bragging about his conquests with several women, claiming that they were begging him not to abandon them to their husbands. Harm, you know that guy Barrow, right? Said Elton, my favorite bartender. This was 3 weeks after Ellie had confessed, so hearing that name made me shudder. Yeah, I know him vaguely. He works at Champ's Auto Parts. I used to buy things there for my old pickup. Why do you ask? He's been bragging around here that he had your wife among others. Just thought you ought to know. He's messing with Ellie's reputation, Harm said. According to Elton, I was furious. I had not intended to escalate the situation, but here we were. The look on my face prompted a concerned expression from my friend. Thanks, Elton. They'll handle it, I replied. That was on Saturday. Ellie had to work that day in emergency medical response. They were shorthanded. When she got home around 5 p.m., I called her into the kitchen. Ellie, have you seen Barrow in the past few weeks? I mean since our little meeting. No, Harm. I never want to see or speak to that jerk again, she said firmly. I believed her. He's spreading rumors about you, bragging that he was with you. Oh my God, said Ellie. We're going after him. I want to ruin him, but it will mean going public, I warned her. Yes, but he's already making it public. The bartender told me about it today. Do you know his wife's name? Yes, it's Catherine, said Ellie. Do you know how to get hold of her without my having to do the research? Their phone number is listed, I replied. Good. Call her and ask her to come here. Don't tell her why, but when she gets here, you're going to tell her everything. There's no getting around it. I want his reputation ruined, fast and deep. Harm. I'm scared. No need to be. He's doing you and all of us wrong, and we're going to put a stop to it. Earlier, I had thought of more extreme measures to deal with him, But I realized making a big scene would only hurt us more. What if she doesn't believe me? Ellie asked, worried. She will. 3 different high school girls saw you with him. She'll believe you. Barrow is in trouble. Catherine Barrow cried her eyes out on our sofa. She never went home that night. She stayed with us. The next day, she went to her lawyer and got the ball rolling. Clyde was served with papers at work, along with a restraining order. A few weeks later, word got around that she had taken him to court. I breathed a sigh of relief. I had been considering various ways to deal with Clyde, but the results we achieved seemed to have done the job. Not everything could be handled with aggression. The outcome was satisfying, albeit embarrassing for Ellie in some circles. But I thought, at least, it was the end of a miserable chapter in our lives. However, it was also the calm before the storm. For almost a year after our reconciliation and the fallout with Clyde, things were tentative between me and Ellie, but I was beginning to relax. Things were almost back to normal. Annie, on the other hand, was less trusting, perhaps more vigilant, because she loved her mother and was afraid she might fall back into her old ways. The bottom line was that she didn't fully trust her yet. I, however, was pretty confident that Ellie wouldn't return to her past behavior. My confidence led me to be less watchful, and that proved to be a huge mistake. Each end of the school year featured a Parent Appreciation Day for the parents of the year's PE students. There were contests between sons and dads, moms and daughters, and kids against faculty, all orchestrated by the PE department and many volunteers. In past years, these events had always been held at various hotels, but this year, due to funding constraints, it was going to be held at the school gymnasium on Saturday, the 22nd, a week from then. Ellie, who still volunteered her time as a nurse, had signed on to help with the decorating committee. This put her in daily contact with the chair of the PE department, Marco Phillips. Marco was in charge of the gym and all its equipment, which meant he was always around, perhaps a bit too much. He was a big man, around 65 and 260 pounds, and was reputed to be quite the ladies' man, despite being married with 3 school-age children. I knew him well enough to not like him. His braggadocio didn't sit well with me. Marco had an office in the gym between 2 classrooms at the back of the building. These classrooms were designated for the health science courses that all students needed to graduate, overseen by the PE instructors. Marco ruled this domain with an iron hand, and it was said, half in jest, that boys weren't even allowed to use the urinals for fear of making a mess. While likely an exaggeration, it illustrated his dictatorial nature. As a result, Marco had keys to all the rooms, and unbeknownst to anyone, he and Ellie had started using one of those rooms for private meetings since she volunteered for the Parent Day Committee. During one of these meetings, the room was dimly lit, with curtains drawn, creating an intimate atmosphere. Marco, ever the charmer, had an air of confidence. He pulled Ellie closer, and their conversation took on a suggestive tone. He tried to persuade her that she was missing something important in her life, emphasizing that her husband could not fulfill her in the same way he believed he could. Ellie, caught in a web of conflicting emotions, reminded Marco of her commitment to her husband, asserting that while he had his appeal, she wouldn't trade her family for anything. Their dynamic was becoming strained. Ellie was growing tired of Marco's overbearing attitude. I was scheduled to return home late Saturday the 14th from an NCT conference in Indianapolis. Ellie should have been home, but I was unable to reach her by phone, which made me uneasy. I knew our daughter Annie was away on a trip, and I was determined to surprise Ellie by arriving home a day early. As I daydreamed about the weekend ahead and the upcoming faculty party, I eventually fell asleep on the flight. When I woke up, we were making our final approach. I took a cab home, not wanting to impose on Ellie to pick me up unexpectedly. She was likely busy at the school, preparing for PE parent night, and I was looking forward to a warm welcome from her after my trip. I knew Annie was still up in the Sierras on her annual backpacking trip sponsored by the environmental club she had joined at the junior college a few months ago. I fully expected a weekend of uninterrupted fun with my wife. What I didn't expect was the car in my driveway that wasn't one of ours. Ellie wasn't alone. My heart caught in my throat. Past experiences made me wary, and I feared the worst. I parked a few doors down and made my way to the side gate at the end of a short path between the garage and the neighbor's hedge. It was late in the day, and the sun was low behind me, helping to conceal my movements. I needn't have worried. The house was unusually quiet. No vacuum cleaner, no clanging of dishes, no humming or singing. My wife always sang while doing housework. I peered into the dinette from the kitchen doorway. Beyond it lay the living room, where I saw my wife reclining on the couch with another man. They were sharing a kiss, and I recognized him as Marco Phillips, the PE teacher. I felt a wave of nausea. Resisting the impulse to rush in and confront them, I realized I needed to think. I knew that if I barged in, it could lead to a messy situation, with two of them against me. I was already contemplating divorce. This would be the second time she had cheated, and I was determined it would be the last. Quietly, I slipped out of the house and made my first call to Rex Coleman, a college friend who had become a private investigator. He agreed to conduct surveillance on Marco, and at that moment, I felt more inclined toward revenge than anything else. I wanted to ensure that the man who had crossed me would pay dearly, perhaps even more than I wanted to confront Ellie. My thoughts drifted to Annie. This situation could hurt her, but I hoped she would weather the storm as she had in the past. I took a motel room for the night, planning to return home the next day. That night, I brooded and drank, trying to make sense of everything. I woke to a gray and rainy day, the weather matching my mood. I knew I needed to keep it together until I figured out how to handle my situation. Later, I called Rex back for the name of a lawyer with a winning track record. He recommended Adele Carter, whose office was nondescript and messy, reminiscent of lawyers in movies like Aaron Brockovich. But appearances can be deceiving. She was clearly a fierce advocate. Though I wasn't feeling good, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't feeling good, but I felt more secure. My lawyer assured me my case was already strong. I could prove that Ellie had cheated before. My only concern, which wasn't significant, was that I hadn't made a major issue of it at the time. Love is complicated, and even now, I wasn't looking forward to what I had to do to Ellie. I wasn't keen on the label of cuck being applied to me, but I also didn't want to bring Ellie down without addressing Mr. Phillips. At some point, Rachel Phillips would be brought into this, and I had no doubt she would confront her husband. Miss Carter also assured me that my private investigator, Rex, was the best. If there was anything to uncover, he would find it. I had given Rex a key to my house. While I wasn't sure if Ellie and her companion would use our place again, I suspected they might. Oh God, I thought, how could she be so reckless? With her history, to risk it all in our own home? Even if I didn't catch her, even if Annie never had a clue, what about the neighbors? It seemed like she was trying to get caught. I told Rex that I wanted the place wired to catch the cheaters if they returned. Rex agreed to install cameras in the bedroom and living room, and he even suggested one for the master bathroom. I questioned that choice, but he explained that a lot of evidence could be lost there. It would be beneficial to have footage of either of them in such a compromising situation. The wheels of justice and revenge were in motion. All I had to do was wait and pretend to be the loving husband I had always been. But soon, that title would change. I arrived home at 6 p.m., 30 minutes later than expected. Ellie was waiting for me with a warm greeting. The corned beef and cabbage smelled incredible, something I would miss when I eventually moved on. She wrapped her arms around my neck and gave me a kiss that felt rehearsed. "How was your flight?" she asked. "Good, long. I'm bushed, but that corned beef and cabbage smells great," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. She spoke animatedly during dinner, and I made all the right responses, asking about her week and about Annie. "Annie will be back tomorrow. I expect she'll be even more tired than you are," I said. I agreed with her assessment of the mountain air's effects. After dinner, I helped her clean up the dishes and store the leftovers. "I'm going to shower and hit the hay. I want to have a nice day tomorrow, and I don't want to be too tired to enjoy it," I said. Ellie looked genuinely upset. "I thought you and I might," oddly. I felt a mix of emotions. The image of Phillips with her was unsettling. I found it hard to be close to her now. Not tonight. I was really tired, but tomorrow could be different. I smiled and gave her a peck on the cheek before heading up the stairs. Sunday dawned bright and sunny, contrasting with the gloom of the day before. Maybe the universe was trying to tell me something. We picked Annie up at school, where about 50 students were milling around. Ellie had been right. Annie looked worn out. "Geez, Dad, it was fun, But I'm exhausted right now, she said. Did anything unusual happen? Did you see Bigfoot or anything? I think Bigfoot is driving the car, Ellie laughed. But honey, you might want to slow down a little. The streets are still wet from yesterday. Ellie seemed in a good mood, despite the situation with Marco Phillips a couple of days ago. I thought that maybe this unconventional arrangement wasn't so bad. Still, I was concerned about how the divorce would affect Annie. I felt anger toward Ellie for not considering the impact on our daughter. It seemed like her focus was solely on herself and her relationships. As we headed upstairs, I started to feel worn out. I managed to postpone what was expected by giving a few sincere kisses and hugs. Ellie looked a bit surprised, maybe even disappointed, but she didn't say anything. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else, got cleaned up, dressed, and headed to school. I knew it was going to be a long day. Ellie was working a double shift at the clinic, so I was grateful she wouldn't be at school today. Annie had 2 classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 9 a.m. I knew Ellie would be gone by the time Rex was busy between then and 3 p.m. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. Bob Fallon, our respected vice principal and a longtime friend, asked if I wanted to join him and a group of fishermen for the weekend. This would give Phillips and Ellie a chance to attend the PE event together, possibly spending some quality time afterward. We planned to be out on the water from Friday evening to Sunday evening, which I thought could work well for my plans. The only issue was Annie. I knew Ellie wouldn't do anything in the house if she thought Annie might catch her. It had been Annie who had exposed Ellie's actions the first time. I was trying to find a way to get Annie out of the house for the weekend when she solved the problem for me. Dad, I'm going to Shell this weekend. We're going to chase boys and have fun at the mall, she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. Thinking quickly, I replied, honey, you can have fun at the mall, but the boy thing is off limits, okay? Yes, Daddy, you're so strict, she laughed. Just then, Ellie walked into the room. I was about to respond when I noticed Annie's expression change, but I dismissed it as my imagination. Nothing, Mom. I was just telling Dad about my weekend plans, Annie said. He said it was okay. Ellie laughed but responded, that sounds a bit reckless, don't you think? Her tone was half serious, and I was taken aback by the odd contrast in her demeanor. I couldn't escape Ellie all week. We spent time together on Wednesday and Thursday, and while I felt conflicted, I didn't want to raise her suspicions. Besides, I was feeling frustrated. I had the impression that she thought she owed me something since she was spending time with Phillips. It felt infuriating to think about. On Friday afternoon, I packed my things and headed to the marina to meet the guys. Ellie was already at the clinic, so I didn't have to see her. I decided to focus on enjoying the weekend with my friends. Rex was on the job, and I felt a mix of emotions about the whole situation. Here I was, navigating through this complex situation, all because of Ellie's choices, and now I was heading out to fish. It was a strange place to find myself. As we pulled away from the dock, I watched the shore disappear and felt a mix of relief and tension. The trip out was fun. The sea was a little choppy, but the boat was more than capable. We ate, drank a lot of beer, and I felt better than I had in days. While I was at sea, I received a call on my cell. Yeah. Oh, Rex, really? Okay, do what you can, I said before hanging up. Annie had been picked up by her friend just minutes after I left. No sooner had she gone than Ellie returned from work after only 2 hours and parked on the street in front of the house. Rex thought she must have forgotten something and would head back to work soon, but that wasn't the case. 20 minutes after Ellie arrived, a Toyota pickup pulled into the driveway. The garage door opened, and the pickup went inside. It was clear that they didn't want the neighbors to see whose car was parked there. Saturday morning dawned red and blustery. The seas, which had been calm the day before, were now crashing against the bow. We decided to head back in. None of us had any intention of riding out any storms. 2 days later, the news reported that 2 fishing boats had gone down over the weekend. As I docked at around 9 a.m., I called Rex. He was at home. Yeah, the storm was pretty rough, he said, sounding tired. I think I might sneak down there. I confirmed I'd be careful. I'll be there in an hour, I said and hung up. I was torn. Should I try to catch them red-handed, or wait for Rex to ensure everything was set up? After some deliberation, I decided to wait. But I couldn't just sit idly by. I had to do something. I rented a car, leaving mine at the marina, and parked several doors down on the opposite side of the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the situation if Phillips came out. About 40 minutes later, Rex arrived, parked behind me, and slid into my car. "You shouldn't be here, Harm. It's better to let me handle this. Men often complicate things, and that's why women usually get the better deal in divorce cases," he advised. I nodded, but I just wanted to see Phillips's face. I knew him, but I wanted to see that look of satisfaction on his face, which made me uneasy. As if on cue, a red Chevy drove slowly past the house. "That's my daughter," I exclaimed, panic rising in my voice. "Rex, get her away from here." "Got it, buddy." Rex jumped into his car and followed the Chevy. I saw the two cars turn the corner, and just then, I noticed Rex's car flash a police-style blue light. It was probably illegal, but it would certainly get the girls to stop. 5 minutes later, he returned. "I had to tell her. She knows." "Gus, does that kid miss anything?" "Not a whole lot," Rex replied. "Tell her if she ever needs a job to look me up." I stared at him, surprised. He wasn't kidding. Around noon, the two of them finally came out. They moved quickly, almost sneakily, to her car parked by the curb and left. I followed them while Rex went into the house to gather evidence. I was to call him as soon as I knew where they were headed. 10 minutes later, they pulled into an IHOP. Apparently, Ellie was too tired to cook breakfast. I wondered who would be paying. I had the urge to go inside and overhear their conversation, but I resisted. I called Rex. "Yeah, they're at the IHOP on 3rd. "Got it. The audio is excellent," he replied. "Can't wait to see the pics." We spoke for a minute more. He said he was using my computer to transfer all the pictures and videos, and the quality was outstanding. He planned to send me copies of everything. I was to notify him when Ellie and her boyfriend were done eating, in case he needed to make a quick exit. Almost an hour later, Ellie and her boyfriend exited the restaurant, holding hands, talking, and smiling. As they seemed to be having a good time, I wondered about the condition of the house. I was betting they hadn't had a chance to clean up. I decided to walk in on them. We had all the evidence we needed, and Annie knew everything. The marriage was over. There was no reason to wait any longer. Why let them continue their affair any more than they already had? I called Rex to let him know my plan. I expected him to try to talk me out of it, but instead, he agreed to wait inside and be my witness. "But Harm, don't confront either of them. It could ruin your case," he warned. I assured him I wouldn't. I followed my wife and her boyfriend back to the house, taking a few side streets to avoid being seen. I knew where they were headed and gave them enough time to get inside. On the way, I had an idea and called Rex. "Yeah, Rex, call Mrs. Phillips and get her over here. Tell her anything, even the truth if you have to." 15 minutes later, the lovers parked in front of the house and hurried inside. I knew Rex was somewhere in there. I imagined him hiding in a closet or something similar, but I wanted to wait for Mrs. Phillips. She lived nearby, just 5 minutes away. When she arrived 8 minutes later, I intercepted her. "Did Rex tell you?" I asked. "Yes," she replied sharply. "He said you and my husband are inside together." "This isn't the first time," I told her. "You'll get all the pictures, audio, and videos." As we headed for the house, she muttered, "That jerk. We have 3 kids." Hearing Rachel Phillips, a woman so composed, speak like that surprised me, but it would have to wait for another time. Right now, we needed to interrupt their encounter. I pulled out my cell phone and set it to take pictures, wanting to capture their expressions when we disrupted their plans. I aimed to avoid the windows and didn't want to enter through the front door. Instead, we snuck around the back to the basement door and let ourselves in quietly. We could hear voices upstairs, but the words were indistinguishable. "Careful of the 3rd step. It squeaks," I whispered as I stepped over it. We climbed the stairs, and despite the situation, I couldn't help but notice Rachel's presence. She was an attractive woman, and the closeness felt unexpected. At the top of the stairs, I listened at the door. The voices were further away, probably in the front room. I slowly opened the door and signaled for Rachel to follow me. "You're really proud of that guy, aren't you?" I heard Ellie say. "Yeah, you seem to like it," Phillips laughed. We stepped into the living room and froze. Phillips was completely naked, and Ellie was still dressed except for her blouse, which she had apparently just removed. Harm's face turned ashen, and tears filled her eyes as she ran out of words. "Hello," Rachel said, advancing on her stunned husband. "Do not come home today. I will send a bag of clothes to your mother's tomorrow. This marriage is over. If you don't contest it and stay away from me and the kids until I say you can visit, you can keep your car and your personal items. Everything else is lost to you. Got it?" She snapped her fingers, and he flinched. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he said, visibly shaken. Rachel picked up her blouse and purse and left. Phillips dressed quickly and followed her out. I heard the garage door open and the roar of his engine as he drove away. Rex emerged from the guest room closet, and we talked, just the three of us. Rachel was crying, and I felt my own eyes misting over. It was a somber occasion. About an hour later, Annie returned and quickly assessed what had happened. "How long have you known?" I asked, slightly annoyed that she hadn't come to me sooner. "I wasn't sure, Dad. It was the smell," she explained. "Mr. Phillips wears this awful cologne. Last week when you were gone, I smelled it in the house. I knew it wasn't yours. At least I was pretty sure it wasn't. So I got suspicious and arranged to be at Shell's. I wanted to see if he showed up when he thought we were gone. He did, and I was going to try to call you. But Mr. Coleman stopped me." Rex spoke up. "My offer to help you still stands." I just shook my head. "What are you going to do about Mom?" Annie asked. "I'm divorcing her, Annie. I have no choice. I love her, but she can't resist the temptation." "I know, Dad." The next several days were a nightmare. The pressure was off, but my lawyer was eager to proceed. Rex was supportive, and we met a couple of times to drown my sorrows in a tankard of ale. Actually, several tankards. But I missed Ellie, my cheating heart. The reality that I might never see her again weighed heavily on me. After so many years and the psychological investment in our marriage, along with our shared love for our child, it wasn't easy to forget everything and start anew. Rachel had become a friend. She had kicked her husband out and needed a sympathetic ear as well. For his part, Mr. Phillips had remained scarce since the day of reckoning. I had a feeling he would try to improve his situation whenever the opportunity arose. He had quit his job at the school, realizing that being around me was more pressure than he wanted to endure, at least for now. The fact that his resignation had been accepted without any fuss was telling. I was sitting in the bar alone, talking to Elton. The place was quiet, which suited me just fine. I had grown weary of well-meaning people trying to cheer me up since the end of my marriage. I needed space, apart from my favorite bartender, of course. "Harm, I hear that Phillips guy quit the school. Is that true?" Elton asked. "Yeah, it's true," I replied, feeling indifferent. "I figured it was. He used to come in all the time. Haven't seen him since you and Ellie." He trailed off, sensing the mood. I nodded, lost in thought. Elton wandered to the other end of the bar as another customer signaled for a drink. I barely registered what he said next until I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and there, as bold as ever, stood Marco, the former PE department chair at my school. "Well, who do we have here?" "Mr. High and Mighty," he sneered. I didn't respond, hoping he would just leave. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue, hotshot?" His voice dripped with venom. "Don't push it, Marco." "I'm not in the mood," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "Oh, you're not in the mood? Well, what if I am?" He shot back, moving closer, a smirk on his face. "Bad judgment on your part," I said, standing my ground. Marco moved toward me, and I prepared myself. He still had a court date with Rachel, and I didn't want to give him any reason to provoke me. He threw a punch, but I sidestepped him, and he stumbled into the bar. He turned to face me again, beckoning with his finger. I remained silent, knowing Elton was watching from behind the bar, amused by the situation. "Oh yeah, I forgot you were some kind of big-shot army man. Let's see how much you remember," he said as he charged at me. I anticipated this mistake and stepped aside, delivering a swift kick to his knee. He collapsed to the ground, gasping in pain. "Oh God, it hurts like hell," he cried. After a few minutes of swearing and struggling, he crawled toward the door and managed to get himself upright enough to stumble outside. I returned to the bar, feeling a mix of triumph and frustration. How could Ellie have chosen someone like Marco Phillips over me? The insult felt almost worse than the betrayal itself. The last time I saw Ellie, she had rushed out of the house, clutching her blouse and purse, not even bothering to take her car. I later found out from Rex that she had called a cab a few blocks away and vanished from my life. I thought she would try to reach out during the following days, but as the days turned into weeks, I realized I was wrong. At first, I was mildly concerned, then worried, and eventually very worried. My last impression of her was one of guilt and sadness. I hoped she wouldn't do anything rash. That was 3 years ago, and the memory was still fresh. Now, I felt a profound emptiness. I was alone. Not in the sense that I had no one around me or couldn't find someone to date, but in a deeper sense. My ex-wife hadn't even shown up for the divorce. I had made my lawyer, Miss Carter, who shared my last name, commit to giving her half of the estate, but I doubted she was even aware of the settlement or the divorce. I expected she might have guessed I had gone through with it, but it still felt sad, cold, and empty, just like my life. Ellie ran away that day. Initially, she didn't even realize how disheveled she looked. She stopped behind a tree and hurriedly put on her blouse before heading out again. She had $35 and a couple of credit cards. In a moment of desperation, she bent the cards in half several times and tossed them into a smelly trash can behind a convenience store. Sitting on a park bench, Ellie sobbed into the fabric of her purse as she mentally assessed the events of the past 24 hours. How could she have been so incredibly foolish? There was no defense for what she had done. She had humiliated her husband, and now she had nothing. She felt she deserved nothing but the $35 in her pocket. Now, she needed to find a way to escape her shame. Poor Harm. She knew he would worry about her, but he would eventually move on with his life. He deserved better. Taking a bus toward downtown, she didn't care where she was headed. She just wanted to get away. She got off and began to walk, losing track of time and her surroundings. Hours later, she found herself in a rough part of town, late at night, exhausted and unsure of where she was. Stopping at another park bench, she took off her shoes, relieved to be out of them. Just then, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, woman, what you doing?" She ignored him, looking around and realizing the danger of her surroundings. The man approached her, looking grubby and unkempt, and she instinctively knew he was a regular in this neighborhood. "You know where you are?" he asked. "No," she replied hesitantly. "I saw you hesitate. You're new here, aren't you?" "What is this place?" she asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Skid Row," he said simply. Suddenly, it all made sense. He was homeless, perhaps struggling with addiction, and here she was, feeling homeless too. "Is there a shelter around here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Down in the city proper, there are a couple of missions, but not much else. I take it you have no place to stay?" He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and pity. A wave of despair washed over her. She realized just how precarious her situation was. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to hold back her sobs. "Look, lady, you can stay with me, but there's a price," he said, his tone shifting. "What do you mean?" she asked, alarmed. "I just survive day by day. If you want protection down here, you need to make some sacrifices." Stunned, she shook her head. "I don't understand." He shrugged, indifferent to her discomfort. "You'll need to be careful. This place isn't safe." Despite her instincts screaming at her to run, she felt trapped. "Where?" she asked, realizing she was out of options. "Follow me," he said, leading her to a dark loading dock behind a deserted business. There, he pointed to a corner with flattened cardboard boxes. Feeling sickened but aware of the gravity of her situation, she followed him. She stood by the cardboard box, hesitating as he indicated she should strip. With a heavy heart, she complied, folding her clothes neatly and placing them aside. He quickly removed his own clothes, and she studied him more closely. He was thin but muscled, and beneath the grime, there might have been a hint of attractiveness. In that moment, she understood the harsh reality of her circumstances. After a tense encounter, they lay beside each other on the cardboard, and she curled into a fetal position, overwhelmed by the night's events. "Come here," he said, and she looked at him. They lay together for a while. He actually held her, and she let him. "What now?" she asked. "We go home," he replied, pointing. "Where's home?" He led her to a small shack he had constructed. It was far from ideal, but he assured her it was waterproof. It was the best he could do at the moment. Thus began Ellie's slow descent into a life of hardship. Meanwhile, Harm waited impatiently for Rachel. His fingers had tapped out entire symphonies on the table surface before she finally appeared and slid into a chair across from him. "Criminy, Rachel, I'm going to buy you a watch," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm a woman. I'm supposed to be late," she replied with a playful smirk. "Well, you should have been here sooner," he countered with a chuckle. "Right," she said, a hint of seriousness returning to her tone. "Anyway, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks." The waitress arrived with their drinks, Harm's vodka and Rachel's rum and cola. He left a $20 on the table, asking her to keep an eye on their glasses. "It's awful quiet around the house without him," Rachel said, her expression thoughtful. "Don't get me wrong, I'm glad he's gone. With him around, it was always the wrong kind of noise, if you know what I mean." "Yeah, I guess I do," Harm replied. "How are you doing, Rachel?" You'd think that after 3 years I could answer that, but I can't. I miss her. I miss her a lot. I guess I was really and truly in love, she admitted, a wistful smile creeping onto her face. They shared a moment of understanding. Since their divorces, Rachel and Harm had formed a bond, supporting each other through their respective heartbreaks. Rachel dated occasionally, but Harm only rarely ventured into the dating scene, and mostly just to reassure himself that he still could. "So how is Annie doing?" Rachel asked. "You know, in the time we've been friends, I've really grown fond of that girl," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "She has that effect on people," Harm replied. "She's going to graduate soon, right?" "Yes, next month. I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be a little bittersweet, though, without her mom there to celebrate her achievement." Rachel looked down at her drink, a shadow crossing her features. "You really do still love that woman, don't you?" "I guess I don't know. I hate what she did to me. I keep trying to convince myself she has some kind of condition or something. I know that's just me trying to make sense of it all, but it's all I can come up with," he confessed. She gently laid her hand on his arm. "You're a good man, Harm. I hope things work out for you and for Annie." On a lighter note, she added, "I have a company party at the end of next week, and I'm dateless. Do you think you could escort me? I went solo the past 2 years and really felt out of the loop," she continued, laughter dancing in her voice. "Absolutely, dear heart. Just tell me when, and I'll be there." "Wonderful. I was afraid you'd think of it as cheating." "It's Saturday evening at the Roundtree, Rachel." "That was uncalled for, though," he said, laughing. Rex had been loosely tasked with trying to locate Ellie. In the beginning, he moved heaven and earth to find her, though he had his misgivings. For the past 2 years, his efforts had become more passive, watching and listening rather than taking action. One day, as he was coming out of a cheap downtown hotel, he noticed something strange across the street. A woman, a bag lady, was wrestling with a store owner over some groceries. Ever the white knight, he rushed across the street. "Hey, cut her some slack, okay? I'll pay for the stuff," he said, handing the snarling man a $20 bill. That seemed to pacify him. Rex turned to speak to the woman, but she had already left with the groceries. Determined not to waste the opportunity, he adopted a friendly demeanor and asked the store owner, "Ever seen this woman around here?" He showed him a picture of Ellie. "Are you kidding?" the man replied, surprised. "Why do you ask?" "You just bought her groceries," Rex pointed out. The man nodded. "Her name's Grace. I don't think she has a last name." "None of them do." Rex felt frustrated. So near yet so far. Now he knew for a fact that she was in the area. Since she had never seen him, he could observe without fear of being recognized and having her vanish again. He recalled that fateful day when she had rushed out the door and into thin air, leaving him hidden in the bedroom. Meanwhile, Annie was exiting her philosophy of aesthetics class when Carol Montgomery approached her. "So, Annie, has your mom been found yet?" Carol asked. "No, not yet. We're still hoping," Annie replied. Why? Your dad needed to be rid of her. She was a mess, Annie, and you know it, Carol insisted. Annie's expression darkened. Don't ever say that again. You'll be able to avoid a lot of dental bills. Well, you know what I say is true. We both saw her that day in the mall. All over that guy. Danielle saw it too, Carol added, oblivious to the tension. Carol had never seen the right hook that had taken her down when the dust had settled, leaving Annie in cuffs in the back of a squad car. Harm, he said, picking up the phone in his room at the school. Could you please come to the office right away? The voice of Bob F. in the VP's office requested. Sure, I'll be right over, he replied. At the office, he learned that Annie was in trouble with the police and being held at Central Jail. He rushed out the door, hoping they would accept credit cards down there. In the car, Harm and Annie sat in silence almost the whole way home. Finally, he asked, Okay, why? She insulted Mom. Called her a Annie, he interrupted, glancing over at her. I couldn't take it, so I unloaded on her, Annie confessed. Gus, he said. The officer said the girl is in the hospital. Yeah, well, she brought it on herself. No one talks that way about my mom or my dad, either, Annie retorted, defiant. I hope this doesn't cost us a lawsuit, Harm said. I'll pay it, Dad, if it comes to that, she replied. Dear heart, we'll play it by ear. From what I hear, she provoked you. That may mitigate things some. We'll see, he said, trying to remain calm. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. Harm didn't let it show on his face, but he was secretly proud of his daughter. She had acted impulsively, but he knew he would have done the same thing. Oh, Ellie, he thought, his heart heavy. If you only knew. The legal matter between Annie and Carol was resolved in an unexpected way the very next day. Hey, you're Harm Carter, said a big guy leaning against a pillar in front of the administration building. Yes, I am. What can I do for you? Harm replied. The guy approached and landed a powerful punch right into Harm's jawline. How does it feel? He sneered. My name's Ames Montgomery. You might remember me. I was ranked 6th in the WBA heavyweight division a few years back. If your daughter ever messes with mine again, you'll be seeing me again, he said before stalking off. Most of what he said barely registered with Harm. It took several moments for him to regain his composure and feeling in his limbs. Gus, Bob Fallon said, rushing over. That guy really brought it. You okay? Harm nodded. He realized any potential lawsuit against Annie was no longer a concern. Mr. Ames Montgomery may have been a contender, but a military genius he was not. The punch he had taken was worth it. Once the swelling went down, at least, the power punch that had taken Carol down silenced any further talk from anyone about her mother, male or female. Rachel Phillips arrived looking stunning, and Harm complimented her. Wow, now I know why I have guard duty, she giggled. Well, thank you, mister. You sure know how to massage a girl's ego, she teased. Shall we go? He asked. Damn sure, she replied enthusiastically. They drove the short distance to the Roundtree Inn, where couples were already dancing and enjoying the evening. Harm, with Rachel on his arm, found a table to settle at before heading to the bar. They ordered their usual drinks and returned to their table to enjoy the lively atmosphere. As the evening progressed, 2 other couples joined them, and within moments, introductions were made. Laughter filled the air as they all drank and chatted animatedly. It was the best time at a party. About an hour and a half later, Sam Tour was dancing with Rachel. He had his hand lightly on her waist, but Rachel gently pushed it away. Harm, who was between dances at that moment, noticed and knew he had to intervene. Pamela, may I have this dance? He asked. Oh yes, she replied, pulled out of her reverie by his words. They danced near Rachel and Sam, making their presence known. Sam wouldn't be getting any attention from Rachel that night, and it was evident in his expression that he was miffed. Harm was determined to talk to him. When the dance ended, the 4 returned to their table. The other couple that had joined them were still on the dance floor. Harm asked Sam to help him get a round of drinks at the bar. Still annoyed, Sam couldn't very well refuse, so he nodded, and they headed over. As they waited for the bartender to notice them, Harm leaned in. Sam, listen to me and listen well. Don't try to get involved with Rachel, or anyone else for that matter. You have a wonderful wife, and you need to make sure she knows how much you appreciate her. Trust me, it's not worth it. What in the hell? Who are you? Sam started, but Harm cut him off. He took a firm grip on Sam's shoulder and leaned closer. I know what I'm talking about. You have a great lady there, and straying will only lead to regret. Take it from me. Harm released Sam and smiled at him. You've got a lot of nerve, Sam said, trying to regain his composure. Yeah, I know. I'm an a-hole, Harm admitted with a laugh. But I'm an a-hole who cares about you and your wife. Sam huffed, clearly skeptical. They finally got their drinks and returned to the table. The rest of the evening went smoothly. After he got over his embarrassment from Harm's earlier confrontation, Sam danced all but 2 dances with Rachel. He even kept his hands to himself during those dances. By the end of the night, as they went to get the ladies' wraps, Sam approached Harm. I want to thank you. I've thought about what you said. I've got 6 kids and a pretty good-looking wife. I really don't need anyone else, do I? No, you don't. And for the record, your wife is stunning, Harm said. On the drive home, Harm took Rachel to a small all-night coffee shop near her place. They sat sipping their cappuccinos contentedly. What did you do to Sam? Rachel asked. He apologized to me for his earlier behavior, Harm replied. I think he realizes what he has now. You know, you're a pretty nice guy, Rachel said, covering his hand with hers. Meanwhile, Rex had managed to find Ellie, but decided to keep his distance until he figured out how to approach her. He knew he couldn't make her return if she didn't want to, and he wondered if Harm would be open to reconciliation if he had the chance. He believed the best thing for Harm was to forgive her, but that didn't mean it would be easy. Ellie was in a tough spot. Though she was a registered nurse with a master's degree and could work anywhere, she seemed to be punishing herself for her past mistakes. Rex hoped she might find the strength to forgive herself enough to try again, but he would take it one day at a time. One day, while keeping an eye on her, a man from the area knocked her down and grabbed the bag she was carrying. Rex waited until the man turned the corner before he confronted him. What do you have there, man? Rex asked. Huh, said the man, turning to see who was addressing him. I saw you knock her down and take her back. Give it back to her right now, and I won't make this difficult, Rex said, pulling his jacket open to reveal a firearm in his belt. Mister, it's just a bag of oranges, the man said, attempting to dismiss Rex. She said she'd get me some, but then she wouldn't share. I dumped her because of that, he said, expecting the other to understand. Rex replied, take the oranges back and give them to her. I'm not going to say it again. The man hesitated, considering protesting some more, but he quickly decided against it. It wasn't worth the risk of tangling with someone who clearly didn't belong in the area. Okay, he relented and retraced his steps to return the oranges. Rex watched from behind a dumpster, observing as they talked for a few minutes. He saw the man return the bag to Ellie and, in a moment of desperation, noticed him touch her shoulder. Rex felt a wave of concern wash over him. Had she really fallen that low? He couldn't wait much longer. Ellie needed to get out of there. He watched as they sat together, each enjoying an orange, with Ellie smiling up at the man. The irony struck him hard. Ellie had likely connected with him for a sense of safety. Rex made a mental note that some protection at night was better than none. Realizing he needed to return to the office, he headed out. Meanwhile, Annie was sitting across from her dad in the kitchen. Dad, I miss Mom, she said softly. I know, babe. I miss her too, Harm replied. Dad, would you take her back? I mean, if she promised to be good in everything? Annie asked, her voice hopeful. Harm slowly shook his head. I don't know, babe. I just don't know. She's done it twice. I'm not sure if she can help herself. What if she can't? Annie pressed. What do you mean? Harm asked, puzzled. I mean, what if there's a psychological reason that makes it hard for her to resist temptation? Annie explained. Harm thought for a moment before responding. Well, I guess that would be different. But as far as I know, there's no reason to think your mother has a problem like that. Temptation is not a psychological issue. It's a moral one. Annie fell silent, deep in thought. What are you planning to do today? She asked, changing the subject. I have a job interview. I'll be home soon, Harm replied. Who's the interview with? Annie asked, curious. I'll let you know if it goes well, he said, avoiding the question. Okay, see you for dinner. Annie sat in the office, waiting. The office of Adele Carter was quiet at the moment when she heard the doorknob turn. Looking to her right, she saw Adele approaching. Hi, I'm Adele, the well-dressed lady said, offering her hand. You must be Annie. Yes, ma'am, Annie replied. Rex will be here in a minute. He has an office in the back. Would you like to wait there? It's more comfortable. Yes, ma'am. That would be fine, Annie said. Less than 5 minutes later, Rex entered his office and smiled at the young lady sitting in front of his desk. Hi, Annie. So, do you think you'd like to be a PI? Yes, sir, she said, feeling a little shy about asking for the job. She knew Rex, and since he was friends with her dad, she was confident she'd get the position unless she couldn't agree with some of the things she'd learned in her coursework in police science. I guess you know firsthand about some of the things we do, right? Rex asked. Sure do, Annie replied. And you graduate in a few weeks, right? Rex continued. Yes, sir. May 20th. Well, Annie, there are a couple of things I need to discuss. Keep in mind you've got the job if you want it, but I have to ask because we do things here that require good judgment. You'll need to abide by these rules, no matter what, kind of like a newspaper journalist has to protect their sources. Am I making myself clear? Yes, I think so, she said. And a lot of the work can be tedious and unrewarding. Some of it is downright distasteful, he warned. Yes, I know. Like spying on cheaters or working for people you wouldn't want to be associated with, Annie replied. Exactly. Sometimes you might even find yourself liking the people you're spying on better than those who hired you, Rex said with a chuckle. Annie laughed. I can believe that. But Rex, there's one thing I won't do. Break the law. You can count on that. Rex nodded. I deserve that. I never should have crossed a line, but sometimes people push too far. He paused, looking at her. What we do is always confidential. If I, as your boss, say to keep quiet, you need to do just that. Are we clear? Yes, sir, Annie replied. Welcome aboard, Annie. I've already prepared the paperwork. Miss Carter, who employs both of us, has prepared the documents here. Take a look, and if you wish, sign and date them in the marked places. Annie examined the relatively simple documents closely. Is that my salary? I mean, I'll be earning every dime of it, she replied. Your days of freeloading off your dad are over, he joked, almost choking with laughter. She signed and dated the papers, then pushed them back to him. Okay, remember, we are not bankers. We don't keep bankers' hours. We have no time clocks and no union representatives. You're on the job starting now. Okay, sure. Now I'm going to tell you something in confidence. You are not at liberty to share this with anyone for any reason until I say so. Got it? Yeah, I got it, she replied, becoming a bit irritated by the repeated caution. Then I found your mom, he said, letting his words sink in. Pardon me, she replied, stunned. I found your mom, but you cannot tell your dad, not yet. In fact, you might not ever be able to tell him. I'm still working on that, he said. Rex, Annie exclaimed. I'm the boss here, he replied, and I'm using that judgment I mentioned earlier. For this to be useful, both your parents need to be on the same page. Otherwise, we'll just be reopening old wounds. He paused, gauging her reaction. You and I will be going to see your mom today. If she's open to seeing him, we'll take it from there. Are you with me? Annie was shaking with emotion. She could hardly sit still. Yes, she said between clenched teeth. Let's go. Rex smiled, and they drove in silence. The day was hot and muggy, but the air-conditioned car kept them comfortable. Can I ask where we're going? Annie inquired. Skid Row, Rex replied. Annie looked at him, her mouth agape. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Where your mom is? Yes, she's in a tough spot. She's struggling and clearly depressed. I'm worried about her, and we need to approach this carefully. My God, Annie muttered, feeling overwhelmed. They pulled into a small, littered lot at the back of a soup kitchen. Rex gestured for her to get out. She should be in here around this time. He handed her a fishing cap and a pair of dark sunglasses that covered much of her face. We'll observe for a few minutes, okay? Okay, Annie said. One more thing. I had you wear those old clothes for a reason. We're not in disguise, but we don't want to stand out. You're going to talk to her first. When the time is right, I'll position myself near the back door. If she tries to leave, I'll be there to intercept her. We must speak with her today. Absolutely, Annie replied. Inside the soup kitchen, dozens of tables filled the space, about half occupied. Most patrons were older men and women, with a few children playing between the benches. The sight made Annie feel a pang of guilt. Rex, how can there be this much poverty in a country like ours? She asked. There shouldn't be. Someday, the people in power will have to stop catering to the wealthy and pay attention to folks like these. They'll need to do something about it, he said. See that guy over there with the UCLA cap? Yes, Annie replied. He's a doctor who lost his license after getting into trouble, but still works here, helping others for free, Rex explained. Oh, and by the way, your mom's name is Grace. I've learned she's helped him out from time to time. They took a seat at a vacant table in the middle of the room. Why don't you grab us both a cup of coffee? I'll wait here, Rex suggested. Annie nodded and walked toward the coffee station. As she approached, she suddenly froze. Just 2 tables down, she saw her mother. Gathering her composure, she moved over a couple of tables and got the coffee. Slowly and unobtrusively, she returned to Rex. She's there, Annie said, nodding. Yeah, I spotted her at the same time you did. She's alone, Rex confirmed. Take your cup and go sit with her. Remember, her name is Grace around here. If she doesn't recognize you at first, take off the hat and glasses. Be gentle. She's a broken woman. Let her know you love her early on. It may help, Rex said, preparing to head for the back door. Annie nodded and casually made her way among the tables to where her mother was sitting, nursing her own cup of coffee. She slid into the seat across from her. Hi, Grace, said Annie. The woman looked tired and only half present. Do I know you? She asked. Yes. Annie took off the hat and glasses. I love you, Mom, she hurried to say. What the? How did you? Mom, I love you, Annie repeated, tears welling in her eyes. Annie, I know. Mom, it's okay now. I'm here. I know you have questions. So do I. Mom, we are never going to be apart again, Annie said firmly. Oh, Annie. Ellie Carter got up and rushed around the table to hug her daughter. Tears flowed freely between them. Rex watched from the back, waiting for the signal from Annie. It was a full 5 minutes before Annie remembered he was there. When she did, she motioned him over. What's wrong? Ellie sensed something. It's okay, Mom. I have a job. I'm a PI, Annie said proudly. She indicated Rex, who sat down opposite them. Annie, what am I going to do? Sobbed her mother. Mrs. Carter, this is complicated. When you left 3 years ago, your husband was angry, but he was also worried about you. He hired me to locate you and to make sure you were safe. To answer your unstated question about what comes next, that's going to be a tough one. Your daughter, and I think you belong at home with your husband. But he still hates me, Ellie said, her voice trembling. No, he doesn't hate you. He loves you, Rex said gently. He's just not sure he can trust you. Well, yes and no. Honestly, he worries that he might not be able to survive mentally if he has to go through this again, Rex continued. But on the other hand, I know he is sick with worry about you and would want to have you back if you'd be willing. Annie had let them into the house while her dad was out. Rex and Ellie had moved themselves into the den, and Annie was in the kitchen, ready to intercept her dad when he came back. A call to his cell had confirmed that he would be there in no more than 10 minutes. No one had yet informed him of his special visitor. Annie heard the garage door opener engage and waited for her dad to enter through the kitchen door. Hi, Dad. Hi, baby. How did the interview go? He asked, noticing the excitement in her voice. Are you going to tell me? He teased. Yes, Dad. I got the job. I'm now a private investigator. I still have to get licensed, and I have 3 weeks of school left, but as of today, I'm fully employed, she said proudly. Wonderful, baby. But I'm not surprised. I know Rex will have a great helper in you. Yes, he will, Dad. I intend to be the best. Harm Carter smiled, filled with pride for his daughter. Dad, there's something else. "I need you to meet someone," Annie said, and for a moment, Harm felt a twinge of worry. Did she have a boyfriend? Was he about to meet his future son-in-law? He wasn't sure how he'd feel about that, but there was nothing he could do about it now. So he replied, "Sure, Annie. When and where?" Annie took his hand and led him into the den. He stood in the doorway, motionless. A woman in ragged clothes, with bags under her eyes and unkempt hair, sat on the couch. But for all the incongruity, this was his ex-wife. "Ellie!" he exclaimed, tears beginning to flow from his eyes. He went to her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Don't you ever leave me again," he said, his voice trembling. She leaned into him, sobbing. Annie joined them on the couch and wrapped her arms around her parents. They were a family again. The days ahead would take a lot of work, but for now, nothing mattered but the touching, the crying, and the healing. Rex smiled to himself, knowing he and Harm would talk later in the week. For the moment, he was done. He had done his job, and for once, it was a happy ending. Well, there were some good days, weren't there? He thought as he let himself out. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like,